Hi everybody, I'm going to read chapter 6, part 2 for you guys. So I hope you enjoy it and I hope you're all doing well. Molly came back to Joad. "Look out for the boils on the jackrabbit," he said. "I don't like to eat no jackrabbit with boils." He took a little cloth bag from his pocket and put it on the porch. Joad said, "The jack was clean as a whistle. Jesus God, you got salt too? By any chance you got some plates and a tent in your pocket?" He poured salt in his hand and sprinkled it over the pieces of rabbit and strung on the wire. The fire leaped and threw shadows on the house, and the dry wood crackled and snapped. The sky was almost dark now, and the stars were out sharply. The gray cat came out of the barn and trotted meowingly towards the fire. But nearly there, it turned and went directly to one of the little piles of rabbit entrails on the ground. It chewed and swallowed, and the entire entrails hung from its mouth. Casey sat on the ground beside the fire, feeding it broken pieces of board, pushing the long boards in as the flame ate off their ends. The evening bats flashed their firelight and out again. The cat crouched back and licked its lips and washed its face and whiskers. Joad held up a rabbit-laden wire with his 2 hands and walked to the fire. "Here, take one end, Molly. Wrap your end around that stake. Now that's good. Let's tighten her up. We ought to wait till the fire's burned down, but I can't wait." He made a wire taut and then a stick and slipped the pieces of meat along the wire until they were over the fire, and the flames licked up around the meat and hardened and glazed the surfaces. Joad sat down by the fire, but with the stick he moved and turned the rabbit so that it would not become sealed to the wire. "This here's a party," he said. "Yes, sure, this is hell of a party. Salt Molly's got, and water and rabbits. I wish he got a pot of hominy in his pocket. That's all I wish." Molly stood over the fire. "You fellas think I'm touched, the way I lived." "Touched nothing," said Joad. "If you're touched, I wish everybody was touched." Molly continued, "Well, sir, it's a funny thing. Something went and happened to me when they told me I had to get off the place. First, I was going to go kill a whole flock of people. Then all my folks all went out west, and I got wandering around, just walking around. Never went far, slept wherever I was. I was going to sleep here tonight. That's why I come. I tell myself I'm looking for a thing, so when all the folks come back, it'll be all right. But I knowed that wasn't true. There ain't nothing to look after. The folks ain't never coming back. I just wandering around like a damn old graveyard ghost." "Fella get used to a place. It's hard to go," said Casey. "Fella get used to the way of thinking. It's hard to leave. I ain't a preacher no more, but all the time I'm praying, not even thinking what I'm doing." Joad turned one of the pieces of meat over the wire. The juice was dripping now, and every drop, as it fell in the fire, shot up a spurt of flame. The smooth surface of the meat was crinkling up and turning a faint brown. "Smell her," said Joad. "Jesus, look down and just smell her." Molly went on, "Like a damn old graveyard ghost, I've been going around the places where stuff happened. Like there's a place over by 40, a gully that's a bush. First time I ever laid with a girl was there. Me 14 and stamping and jerking and snorting like a buck deer, randy as a billy goat. So I went there and I laid down on the ground. I seen it happen all again. And there's a place down by the barn where Pa got gored to death by a bull, and his blood is right down the ground right now. Must be. Nobody ever washed it out. And I put my hand on that ground where my own pa's blood is part of it." He paused uneasily. "You fellas think I'm touched?" Joan turned the meat, and his eyes were inward. Casey, feet drawn up, stared into the fire. 15 feet back from the men, the fed cat was sitting with the long gray tail wrapped neatly in front of its front feet. A big owl shrieked as it went overhead. The firelight showed its white underside with the spread of its wings. "No," said Casey, "you're lonely, but you ain't touched." Molly's tight little face was rigid. "I put my hand on the ground where the blood still is, and I see my paw through the hole in the chest, and I felt a shiver up against me like he done it, and I seen him kind of settle back and reach with his hands and feet, and I seen his eyes all milky with hurt, and then he was still and his eyes so clear looking up. And me a little kid sitting there, not crying or nothing, just sitting there." He shook his head sharply. Joe turned the meat over and over. "And I went in the room where Joe was born. Bed wasn't there, but it was the room and all the things were there. They're right in the same place where it happened. Joe came right to life there. He gave a big old gasp, and then he let out a squawk you could hear a mile, and his grandma stand there, he says, 'That's a daisy,' over and over. And her so proud she bust 3 cups that night." Joe cleared his throat. "Think we better eat her now." "Let her get done and good and brown, almost black," said Molly irritably. "I want to talk. I ain't talked to nobody, and if I'm touched, I'm touched, and that's the end of it. Like an old graveyard ghost going to neighbors' houses in the night. Peter's, Jacob's, Rance's, Joad's, and all the houses all dark, standing like miserable ratty boxes. But they was good parties and dancing. There was meetin's and shouting glory. There was weddings in them houses. And I wanted to go in town and kill folks, 'cause what they'd like when they tractored the folks off the land. What they get so their margin of profit was safe. They got Pa dying on the ground and Joe yelling his first breath, and me jerking like a billy goat under the bush at in that night. What'd they get? God knows the land ain't no good. Nobody been able to make crop for years, but them sons at the desks, they just chops folks on two for their margin of profit. They just cut 'em in two. Place where folks live is them folks. They ain't whole, out lonely on the road in a piled up car. They ain't alive no more. Them sons have killed them. And he was silent, as his thin lips still moving and his chest panting. He sat and looked down at the sands in the firelight. I ain't talked to nobody for a long time, he apologized softly. I've been sneaking around like an old graveyard ghost. Casey pushed the long boards into the fire, and the flames licked up around them and leaped toward the meat again. The house cracked loudly as the cooler night air contracted the wood. Casey said quietly, I gotta see them folks that's gone on the road. I got a feeling I gotta see them. They gonna need help no preacher can give them, hope of heaven when their lives ain't saved, Holy Spirit when their spirit is down and sad. They gonna need help. They gonna live before they can afford to die. Joad cried nervously, Jesus Christ, let's eat this meat before it's smothered in cooked mouse. Look at her, smell her. He leaped to his feet and slid the pieces of meat along the wire until they were clear of the fire. He took Molly's knife from his pocket and sawed through the meat until it was a free piece of wire. Here's for the preacher, he said. I told you I ain't no preacher. Well, here's for the man, then. He cut off another piece. Here, Molly, if you ain't too goddamn upset to eat, this here's jackrabbit, tougher than a bull. He sat back and clamped his long teeth on the meat and tore out a great bite and chewed it. Jesus Christ, hear that crunch. He tore out another bite ravenously. Molly still sat, regarding his meat. Maybe I ought to talk like that, he said. Fella should maybe keep that stuff in his head. Casey looked over, his mouth full of rabbit. He chewed his muscled throat and convulsed in swallowing. Yes, you should talk, he said. Sometimes a sad man can talk the sadness right out of his mouth. Sometimes a killing man can talk the murder right out of his mouth and not do the murder. You done right. Don't you kill nobody if you can help it. And he bit out another hunk of rabbit. Joe tossed the bones in the fire and jumped up and cut off more wire. Molly was slowly eating now, and his nervous little eyes went from one to another and his companions. Joe ate, scowling like an animal, and a ring of grease formed around his mouth. For a long time, Molly looked up at him almost timidly. He put down the hand that held the meat. Tommy, he said. Joe looked up and did not stop gnawing the meat. Yeah, he said, around a mouthful. Tom, you ain't mad with me talking about killing people. You ain't huffy, Tom? No, said Tom, I ain't huffy. It's just something that happened. Everybody knows it wasn't a fault of yours, said Molly. Old man Turnbull said he was going to get you when you come out. Says nobody can kill one of his boys. All the folks hereabouts talked him out of it, though. We was drunk, Joad said. Drunk at a dance. I don't know how she started. And then I felt a knife go into me, and that sobered me up. First thing I see is Herb coming for me with his knife. There was this here shovel leaning against the schoolhouse, so I grabbed it and smacked him over the head. I never had nothing against Herb. He was a nice fellow, come a bullying my sister Rosahan when he was a little fella. No, I liked Herb. Well, everybody told his pa that and finally cooled him down. Somebody says they Hatfield's blood on the mother's side in old Turnbull, and he's got to live up to it. I don't know about that. Him and his folks went on to California 6 months ago. Joe took the last of the rabbit from the wire and passed it around. He settled back and ate more slowly now, chewed evenly, and wiped the grease from his mouth with his sleeve. And his eyes, dark and half-closed, brooded as he looked into the dying fire. Everybody's going west, he said. I got my parole to keep. I can't leave the state. Parole, Molly asked. I heard about them. How do they work? Well, I got out early, 3 years early. The stuff I gotta do, or else they'll send me back in. Gotta report ever so often. How they treat you here in McAllister. My woman's cousin was in McAllister, and they gave him hell. It ain't so bad, said Joe. Like every other place, they give you hell and you raise hell. You get along okay, unless some guard gets it for you. Then you catch plenty of hell. I got along okay, mind my business like any guy would. I learned to write nice as well. Birds and stuff like that, too. Not just word writing. My old man'll be sore when he sees me whip out a bird in one stroke. Pa's gonna be mad when he sees me do that. He don't like no fancy stuff like that. He don't even like the word writing. He kind of scares him, I guess. Every time I see Pa writing, somebody took something away from him. They didn't give you no beatings or nothing like that? No, I just tended my own affairs. Of course, you get goddamn good and sick at doing the same thing every day for 4 years. If you done something you was ashamed of, you might think about that. But hell, if I seen Herb Turnbull coming for me with a knife right now, I'd squash him down with a shovel again. Anybody would, said Molly. The preacher stared into the fire, and his high forehead was white in the settling dark. The flash of the little flames picked out the cords of his neck. His hands, clasped around his knees, were busy pulling knuckles. Joe threw the last of the bones into the fire and licked his fingers, and then wiped them on his pants. He stood up and brought the bottle of water from the porch, took a sparing drink, and passed the bottle before he sat down again. He went on. The thing gave me the most trouble was it didn't make no sense. You don't look for no sense when lightning kills a cow or it comes up in a flood. That's just the way it is. But when a bunch of men take a lock at you for 4 years, it ought to have some meaning. Men is supposed to think things out. Here they put me in and keep me fed for 4 years. They ought to either make me so I won't do her again or else punish me. I'll be afraid to do her again. He paused. But if Herb or anybody else come for me, I'd do her again. Do her before I could figure it out, especially if I was drunk. That sort of seamless thing worries a man. Molly observed. Judge says he gave you light sentence because it wasn't all your fault. Judge said, this guy McAllister, lifer, he studies all the time. He's secretary of the warden, writes the warden's letters and stuff like that. Well, he's one hell of a bright guy and reads law and stuff like that. Well, I talked to him one time about her because he reads so much stuff. And he says I don't do no good to read books. Says he's read everything about prisons now and in the old times, and he says she makes less sense to him now than she did before he starts reading. He says it's a thing that started a way to get hell and gone back, and nobody seems to be able to stop her, and nobody's got sense enough to change her. He says for God's sake don't read about her because he says for one thing you'll just get messed up worse, and for another you won't have no respect for the guys that work for the governments. I ain't got a hell of a lot of respect for them now, said Molly. The only kind of government we got leans on us fellas for is a safe margin of profit. There's one thing that got me stumped, and that's Willie Feely driving a cat and gonna be a straw boss on land. His folks used to own that farm. It worries me. I can see how a fellow may come from some other place and not know better, but Willie belongs. Worried me, so I went up to him and asked him. Right off, he got mad. I got 2 little kids, he says. I got a wife and my wife's mother. Then people gotta eat. Gets madder in hell. Fuss, and the only thing I got to talk about is my folks, he says. What happens to other folks is their lookout, he says. Seems like he's shamed, so he gets mad. Jim Casey's been staring at the dying fire, and his eyes had grown wider, and his neck muscles stood higher. Suddenly he cried, I got her. If ever a man got a dose of spirit, I got her. Got her with all a flash. He jumped to his feet and paced back and forth, his head swinging. Had a tent one time, drawed as much as 500 people overnight. That's before either of you fellas seen me. He stopped and faced them. Ever notice I took no collections when I was preaching out here to them folks in barns in the open? By God, you never, said Molly. People around here got so used to not giving you money that they got being a little mad when some other preacher came along and passed the hat. Yes, sir. I took something to eat, said Casey. I took a pair of pants when mine was worn out. I took a pair of shoes when walking through the ground, but it wasn't like when I had the tent. Some days I'd taken $10 or $20. Wasn't happy that way, so I gave her up, and for a time I was happy. I think I got her now. I don't know if I can say to her. I guess I won't try to say her. But maybe there's a place for a preacher. Maybe I can preach again. Folks out lonely on the road. Folks with no land, no home to go. They gotta have some kind of home. Maybe he stood over the fire. The hundreds of muscles in his neck stood out in high relief. The firelight went deep into his eyes and ignited red embers. He stood and lighted the fire, his face tense as though he was listening, and the hands that had been active to pick, handle, and throw ideas grew quiet, and the moment crept into his pockets. The bats flittered in and out of the dull firelight, and the soft watery burble of a night hawk came across the fields. Tom reached quietly into his pocket and brought out his tobacco, and he rolled a cigarette slowly and looked over it at the coals while he worked. He ignored the whole speech of the preacher as though it were some private thing that should not be inspected, he said. Night after night in my bunk, I figured how she'd be when I come home again. I figured maybe Grandpa or Grandma had been dead, and maybe there'd be some new kids, but maybe Pa not be so tough. Maybe Ma'd sit back a little and let Rosarn do the work. I knowed it wasn't the same as it was. We'll sleep here, I guess, and come daylight we'll get to Uncle John's. Leastwise I will. You think you're coming along, Casey? The preacher still stood into the coals. He said slowly, Yeah, I'm going with you, and when your folks start out on the road, I'm going with them, and where folks are on the road, I'm going to be with them. You'd be welcome, said Joe. Ma always favored you. Said you was a preacher to trust. Rosarn wasn't growing up then. He turned his head. Well, you gonna walk over with us? Molly was looking forward to the road over which they had come. Think you'll come along, Molly? Joad repeated. No, I don't go no place, and I don't leave no place. See that glue over there jerking up and down? That's probably the superintendent of this stretch of cotton. Somebody'd maybe seen our fire. Tom looked. The glow of light was nearing over the hill. We ain't doing no harm, he said. We'll just sit here and we ain't do nothing. Molly crackled. Yeah, we're doing something just being here. We're trespassing, we can't say. They've been trying to catch me for 2 months. Now you look. It's a car coming. We go out in the cotton and lay down. Don't have to go far. Then by God, let 'em try to find us. Have to look up and down every row, just to keep your head down. Joad demanded. What's come over you? Molly was never a run-and-hide kind of fella. You was mean. Molly watched approaching lights. Yeah, he said, I was mean like a wolf. Now I'm mean like a weasel. When you're hunting something, you're a hunter and you're strong. Can't nobody beat a hunter. But when you get hunted, that's different. Something happens to you. You ain't strong. Maybe you're fierce, but you ain't strong. I've been hunted now for a long time. I ain't a hunter no more. I'd maybe shoot a fella in the dark, but I don't maul nobody with a fence stake no more. It don't do no good to fool you or me. That's how it is. Well, you go out and hide, said Joad. Leave me and Casey to tell these beeps a few things. The beam of light was closer now, and it bounced into the sky and then disappeared, and then bounced up again. All three men watched. Molly said, that's one more thing about being hunted. You get to thinking about all the dangerous things. If you're hunting, you don't get to think about them, and you ain't scared. Like you says to me, if you get in any trouble, they'll send you back to McAllister and finish your time. That's right, said Joe. That's what they told me, but sitting here, resting or sleeping on the ground, that ain't getting in no trouble. That ain't doing nothing wrong. That ain't like getting drunk or raising hell. Molly laughed. You'll see. You just sit here and the car'll come. Maybe it's Willie Feely, and Willie's a deputy sheriff now. What are you doing trespassing here? Willie says. Well, you always did know. Willie was always full of crap. So you says, what's it to you? Willie gets mad and says, you get off so I'll take you in. And you ain't gonna let no Feely push you around 'cause he's mad and scared. He's made a bluff and he ain't got nothing to go on. And here's you getting tough and going through. Oh, hell. It's a lot easier to lay out in the con and let him look. It's more fun, too, 'cause they're mad and can't do nothing. You're talking sense, said Joad. Every word you say is sense. But Jesus, I hate to get pushed around. I'd lots rather take a stock at Willie. He's got a gun, said Molly. He'll use it 'cause he's deputy. Then he either got to kill you or you got to get his gun away and kill him. Come on, Tommy. You can easy tell yourself you're fooling them lying out like that. And it all amounts to what you tell yourself. The strong lights angled up to the sky now, and even the drone of a motor could be heard. Come on, Tommy, don't go far. Just 14, 15 rows over, and we can watch what they do. Tom got to his feet. By God, you're right, he said. I ain't got a thing in the world to win, no matter how it comes out. Come on, then, over this way, Molly said, around the house, and laid it in the cornfield about 50 yards. This is good, he said. Now lay down. You only got to pull your head down if they start the spotlight going. It's kind of fun. The three men stretched out at the full length and propped themselves on their elbows. Molly sprang up and ran towards the house, and in a few moments he came back there and threw a bundle of coats and shoes down. They'd have taken them along just to get even, he said. The lights topped the rise and bore down on the house. Joad asked, won't they come here with flashlights and look around for us? I wished I had a stick. Molly said, no, they won't. I told you, I mean, like a weasel. Willie done that one night, and I clipped him from behind with the fence at stake. Knocked him colder on a wedge. He told later how 5 guys came at him. A car drew up to the house, and the spotlight snapped on. Duck, said Molly. The bar of a cold white light swung over their heads and crisscrossed the field. The hiding men could not see any movement, but they heard a car door slam, and they heard voices. Scared to get in the light, Molly whispered. Once, twice, I took a shot at the headlights. That keeps Willie careful. He's got somebody with him tonight. They heard footsteps on the wood, and then from inside the house they saw the glow of the flashlight. Shall I shoot him through the house? Molly whispered. They couldn't see where it come from. Just give him something to think about. Sure, go ahead, said Joad. Don't do it, Casey whispered. It won't do no good, just a waste. We got to thinking about doing stuff that means something. A scratching sound came from the house. Putting out the fire, Molly whispered, kicking over the desk. The car door slammed, and the headlights swung around the fence and at the road again. Now, duck, he said. They dropped their heads, and the spotlight swept over them and crossed and recrossed around the field. And then the car started and slipped away and topped the rise and disappeared. Molly sat up. Willie always tries that last flash. He's done it so often I can time him. And he still thinks it's cute. Casey said, maybe they left some fellas at the house. They'd catch us when we came back. Maybe. You fellas wait here. I know this game. He walked quietly away, and only a slight crunching of the clods can be heard from the passage. The 2 waiting men tried to hear him, but he had gone. In a moment, he called from the house. They didn't leave nobody. Come on back. Casey and Joad struggled up the walk back toward the black bulk of that house. Molly met them near the smoking dust pile which had been their fire. I didn't think they'd leave nobody, he said. Me knocking Willie over and taking the shot at the lights once or twice keeps him careful. They ain't sure who it is, and I ain't gonna let 'em catch me. I don't sleep near no house. You fellas wanted to come along, and I'll show you where to sleep. Where they ain't nobody gonna stumble over you. Lead off, said Joad. We'll follow you. I never thought I'd be hiding on my old man's place. Molly set off across the fields, and Joad and Casey followed him. They kicked the con plants as they went. You'll be hiding from lots of stuff, said Molly. They marched in a single file across the fields. They came to a water cut and slid easily down to the bottom of it. By God, I bet I know, cried Joad. Is it a cave in the bank? That's right. How'd you know? I dug her, said Joad. Me and my brother Noah dug her. Looking for gold, we says we was, but we was just digging caves like a kid does. The walls of the water cut were above their heads now. Ought to be pretty close, said Joad. Seems to me I remember her pretty close, Molly said. I covered her with a brush. Nobody could find her. The bottom of the gulch leveled off and was footing in the sand. Joad settled himself on the clean sand. I ain't gonna sleep in no cave, he said. I'm gonna sleep right here. He rolled his coat and put it under his head. Molly pulled at the covering bush and crawled into his cave. I like it in here, he called. I felt like nobody can come at me. Jim Casey sat down on the sand beside Joad. Get some sleep, said Joad. We'll start for Uncle John at the daybreak. I ain't sleeping, said Casey. I got too much to puzzle with. He drew up his feet and clasped his legs. He threw back his head and looked at the sharp stars. Joad yawned and brought one of his hands under his head. They were silent and gradually skidding the life round of the ground. Holes of burrows of brush began again. The gophers moved and the rabbits crept into green things. The mice scampered over the clods and the winged hunters moved soundlessly overhead. Thank you so much for tuning in. That was the end of chapter 6, and tune in soon for chapter 7. Thanks so much. I hope you're staying safe.